The sound of a train whistle pierced the cool Montana air as Tabitha Anderson clutched her worn carpet bag, standing alone on the depot platform. Her journey had come to an abrupt and unexpected end not by choice, but by deception. The man who had promised her marriage and a new life in San Francisco was nowhere to be found, and the station master had just informed her that her ticket couldn't take her any farther west. It was April 1878, and Tabitha was stranded in Silver Creek, a town she'd never heard of until today. "Miss, you need to clear the platform," the station master called, already turning away to attend to other matters. Tabitha blinked back tears as she stepped down onto the dusty street. At 22, she had left everything behind in Boston: her position as a schoolteacher, her small rented room, and what little family she had left after the fever took her parents. All for a man who had courted her through letters for 8 months, only to abandon her halfway across the country. The late afternoon sun beat down on her navy blue traveling dress as she stood uncertainly at the edge of the main street. Silver Creek seemed to consist of little more than a single dusty thoroughfare lined with wooden buildings: a general store, a saloon, what appeared to be a small hotel, and various other establishments she couldn't identify at a glance. A commotion down the street drew her attention. A group of cowboys had just emerged from the saloon, laughing raucously. Tabitha clutched her bag tighter, her throat constricting with fear. She was alone in a strange town with nowhere to go and rapidly dwindling funds. One of the cowboys broke away from the group, moving with purpose in her direction. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair visible beneath his worn Stetson. His face was partially shadowed by the brim of his hat, but she could make out a strong jaw dusted with stubble. "Pardon me, madam," he said as he approached, his voice surprisingly gentle for a man of his size. "You look a mite lost. Just arrive on the afternoon train." Tabitha straightened her spine, summoning what dignity she could. "Yes, I seem to have found myself in an unexpected situation." He removed his hat, revealing a full head of dark hair and the bluest eyes she'd ever seen. They crinkled slightly at the corners as he studied her with concern. "Name's Vaughn Irwin," he said. "Ranch foreman at the Diamond Creek spread just outside of town. Don't mean to pry, but it's not often we see a lady of quality standing alone at the depot looking." He hesitated. "Abandoned," Tabitha supplied, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. His expression softened. "I was going to say uncertain, madam." "Tabitha Anderson," she replied, offering her name without thinking. "Miss Anderson," he acknowledged with a slight bow of his head. "Might I escort you somewhere? The hotel, perhaps?" Tabitha glanced toward the small building he indicated. Even from this distance, she could tell it was far from the respectable establishments she was accustomed to, and her funds would not sustain her for more than a night or two. She began, but words failed her. How could she explain that she had been lured west by a man who had vanished like morning mist? That she had no place to go, no one expecting her? Something in her expression must have communicated her distress, for Vaughn Irwin's face changed. He took a step closer, keeping a respectful distance but close enough that she could speak without being overheard by passers-by. "Miss Anderson, I don't mean to presume, but if you're in some sort of trouble, Silver Creek's got good folks who might help. Mrs. Palmer runs a boarding house for respectable ladies. Or if you need work, the schoolhouse has been without a teacher since Miss Winters married last fall." Tabitha's heart leapt at the mention of a teaching position. "I was a teacher in Boston," she said quickly. "For 3 years at a girls' school." Vaughn's face brightened. "Is that so? Well now, that's a stroke of luck. The town council's been looking to hire someone. They've got a schoolmarm from back east coming, but not till the fall term." For the first time since stepping off the train, Tabitha felt a flicker of hope. "Do you think they might consider me for the interim position?" "I reckon they'd be fools not to," he said with a smile that transformed his weathered face. "Mayor Fletcher's wife is on the school board. I could take you to meet her right now if you'd like." Tabitha hesitated only briefly before nodding. What choice did she have? That would be most kind, Mr. Irwin. He offered his arm in a surprisingly gentlemanly gesture. Just Vaughn, please, Miss Anderson. As she placed her hand on his arm, she felt the solid strength beneath his shirt sleeve. For the first time since discovering Theodore's betrayal, Tabitha felt something other than despair. This cowboy's unexpected kindness was like finding water in a desert. "Thank you, Vaughn," she said softly. "And you may call me Tabitha." He smiled down at her, and with surprising gentleness, took her carpet bag from her hand. "Let's go see about making you Silver Creek's new teacher, Tabitha." Mayor Fletcher's house was a two-story clapboard structure at the edge of town, painted a crisp white with green shutters, easily the most impressive dwelling Tabitha had seen since arriving in Silver Creek. As they approached, Vaughn explained that Mrs. Fletcher had been instrumental in establishing the town's school 3 years prior. "She's from Philadelphia originally," he said. "Came out when the mayor was just a mining engineer. She's been determined to bring some civilization to Silver Creek ever since." Tabitha smoothed her travel-wrinkled skirts nervously. "I must look a fright after 2 days on the train." Vaughn's gaze swept over her appraisingly, but there was nothing improper in his assessment. "You look like a lady who's had a long journey. Mrs. Fletcher will understand that." His words were reassuring, but Tabitha still felt her heart pounding as he knocked on the front door. A maid answered, and upon hearing their request, led them to a parlor that would not have looked out of place in Boston, with its brocade furniture and lace curtains. Mrs. Fletcher proved to be a slender woman of about 40, with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense manner that reminded Tabitha of the headmistress at her former school. After initial introductions, she subjected Tabitha to a thorough but fair interrogation about her qualifications, teaching philosophy, and how she had come to find herself in Silver Creek. Tabitha explained her situation as delicately as possible, omitting Theodore's deception, and simply stating that her intended marriage had fallen through, leaving her unexpectedly in need of employment. Throughout the interview, Vaughn remained quietly supportive, occasionally offering a comment about Tabitha's composed manner or evident education. "Well, Miss Anderson," Mrs. Fletcher said finally, "you appear to be well qualified and our need is immediate. The children have been without formal instruction for nearly 2 months now. I see no reason why you shouldn't begin on Monday next, provided the rest of the board approves. It would be a temporary position until September, with the possibility of extension if our expected teacher does not arrive." "Thank you, Mrs. Fletcher," Tabitha said, relief washing over her. "I would be most grateful for the opportunity." "There is the matter of accommodations," Mrs. Fletcher continued. "The previous teacher stayed at Mrs. Palmer's boarding house, which I can recommend as entirely respectable. The school provides a small stipend for room and board in addition to your salary." "That sounds perfect," Tabitha said, mentally calculating whether her remaining funds would stretch until she received her first payment. As if reading her thoughts, Mrs. Fletcher added, "We can arrange an advance on your first month's salary if that would be helpful for getting settled." "That's very kind," Tabitha said, trying not to reveal how desperately she needed that advance. After settling the details, Vaughn escorted her out. The sun was beginning to set, painting the western sky in spectacular hues of orange and pink. "Thank you," Tabitha said as they walked toward Mrs. Palmer's boarding house. "I don't know what I would have done without your help today." Vaughn adjusted his hat. "Just doing what any decent fellow would, madam," he paused. "It takes courage to start over in a new place, especially alone." There was something in his voice that suggested he understood this from personal experience. Tabitha glanced at him curiously. "Have you been in Silver Creek long?" "Coming up on 5 years now," he replied. "Came west from Virginia after the war, wanted open spaces and a fresh start." "And did you find what you were looking for?" she asked. He considered this for a moment. "Most days, I reckon I did." His blue eyes met hers. "Silver Creek's a good town, despite how it might appear at first glance. Good people here." Like you, Tabitha said softly. Vaughn ducked his head, seemingly embarrassed by the compliment. Mrs. Palmer's is just up ahead, he said, changing the subject. Best cook in the territory, if you don't mind me saying. You'll eat well there. Mrs. Palmer proved to be a robust widow in her 50s with a booming laugh and an immediate, motherly concern for Tabitha's welfare. Within minutes of their arrival, she had Tabitha settled in a clean, simple room on the second floor and was promising hot bath water and a hearty supper. Mr. Irwin, Mrs. Palmer said as Vaughn set down Tabitha's bag, will you be joining us for supper? Got a pot roast that's been cooking all day. Vaughn glanced at Tabitha, seeming uncertain. I wouldn't want to impose. Nonsense, Mrs. Palmer declared. Miss Anderson could use a friendly face, and Lord knows you could use a decent meal instead of whatever slop they're serving at the saloon. Tabitha found herself hoping he would accept. Despite having just met him, Vaughn's steady presence was comforting in this strange new place. Well, when you put it that way, Mrs. Palmer, how could I refuse? Vaughn said with a smile. Just need to see to my horse first. After he left, Mrs. Palmer helped Tabitha freshen up, providing hot water for washing and even lending her a clean shirtwaist when she saw the condition of Tabitha's travel-worn clothing. Don't you worry about a thing, dear, the older woman said kindly. Everyone has a story that brought them here. Silver Creek's good at giving folks second chances. By the time Tabitha came down for supper, feeling somewhat restored after washing away the train dust, she found the dining room occupied by several other boarders, 2 older women who worked at the dry goods store, and a young man who was apprenticed to the town's blacksmith. Vaughn stood as she entered, pulling out her chair with a courtliness that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. The meal was indeed excellent tender pot roast with carrots and potatoes, fresh bread, and an apple pie for dessert. The conversation flowed easily, with the other boarders curious but not intrusive about the newcomer. Tabitha found herself relaxing for the first time in days, the knot of anxiety in her chest finally beginning to loosen. After supper, Vaughn offered to show her around town the following day. Town's not much, but you should know where things are if you're going to be teaching here, he said. I could come by after you've had breakfast if that suits. Tabitha accepted gratefully. As she bid him good night at the door, watching his tall figure stride down the street toward where his horse was hitched, she marveled at the strange turn her life had taken. This morning, she had been devastated by betrayal, certain her future was in ruins. Now she had a position, a place to stay, and perhaps even the beginning of a friendship. For the first time since leaving Boston, Tabitha slept soundly without tears. The following morning dawned clear and bright. Tabitha dressed in her best remaining outfit, a dove gray skirt and white shirtwaist, and went down to breakfast. Mrs. Palmer's dining room was quiet, the other boarders having already left for work. Your cowboy friend was by earlier, Mrs. Palmer said as she served Tabitha eggs and bacon. Said he'd return at 9 to show you around town. He's not my cowboy, Tabitha corrected gently, though she felt a small flutter at the phrase. Mrs. Palmer gave her a knowing look but said nothing more on the subject. Instead, she filled Tabitha in on the local gossip, who owned which businesses, which families had children who would be her students, and various other tidbits that might help her navigate her new community. Vaughn arrived precisely at 9, his appearance markedly different from the previous day. He had shaved, his dark hair was neatly combed, and he wore a clean shirt under his vest. He still wore his gun belt, Tabitha noted, but she was beginning to understand that was simply part of life here. Good morning, Miss Anderson, he said, hat in hand. Ready to see Silver Creek in all its glory? Indeed I am, Mr. Irwin, she replied, matching his formal tone with a small smile. Their tour began at the schoolhouse, a simple one-room building on the edge of town. It was modest but sound, with rows of desks facing a larger desk and blackboard at the front. A small wood stove stood in the corner for winter heating, and there were actual glass windows, which Vaughn informed her was a point of pride for the town. Books are limited, he said apologetically as she examined the small shelf of readers and arithmetic texts. "But Mrs. Fletcher's been writing to publishers back east trying to get more." "I can work with what's here," Tabitha assured him, "and I brought some of my own books. Not teaching materials, unfortunately, but literature that might be appropriate for the older students." From the schoolhouse, they proceeded to tour the rest of the town. Silver Creek was indeed small one main street with a few side streets branching off, but it had the essential businesses. The general store, a bank, the hotel and saloon, which Vaughn was careful to walk her past quickly, a doctor's office, a small church, and various other establishments. Vaughn seemed to know everyone, and Tabitha found herself introduced to what felt like half the town's population. "How many students will I have?" she asked as they paused for lemonade at the general store where the proprietor, Mr. Wilson, had insisted on treating them. "About 20, ranging from 6 to 16, Vaughn replied. "Some only come when they can be spared from ranch work, especially the older boys." "And what about you?" Tabitha asked. "You mentioned you're a foreman. What does that entail?" Vaughn took a sip of his lemonade before answering. "Diamond Creek's one of the bigger spreads in the territory. I oversee the hands, manage the cattle drives, help with breaking horses, whatever needs doing." "It sounds like a great responsibility," he shrugged modestly. "The owner, Mr. Garrett, lives back east most of the year. Comes out maybe once or twice annually to check on things. Leaves the day-to-day running to me." "He must trust you a great deal," Tabitha observed. "Guess he does," Vaughn acknowledged. "Been with him since the war. I was in his regiment. When he bought the ranch, he asked me to come west and help set it up." They continued their walk, with Vaughn pointing out various landmarks and Tabitha trying to commit everything to memory. By noon, they had circled back to Mrs. Palmer's. "Thank you for the tour," Tabitha said as they stood on the boarding house porch. "I feel much less lost now." "My pleasure," Vaughn replied. He hesitated, seeming to debate something internally. "Miss Anderson, Tabitha, I hope you don't find this presumptuous, but there's a social at the church tomorrow evening. Sort of a regular thing they do on the last Saturday of the month. Might be a good way for you to meet more of the families before school starts Monday." "That sounds lovely," Tabitha said. "Would you be attending as well?" "I could be," he said, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Might even save you a dance if that's not too forward." Tabitha felt her cheeks warm. "Not too forward at all, Mr. Irwin. I would be honored." "Vaughn," he reminded her gently. "Vaughn," she echoed, liking the way his name felt on her lips. He replaced his hat with a nod. "Until tomorrow evening, then." Tabitha watched him walk away, an unfamiliar lightness in her chest. Theodore's betrayal still stung, but somehow in just 24 hours, Silver Creek was beginning to feel less like exile and more like possibility. The church social exceeded Tabitha's expectations. The simple white clapboard building had been transformed with paper lanterns and wildflowers, and a small group of local musicians played lively tunes on fiddle, banjo, and guitar. Women had brought pies, cakes, and other treats, and there was a barrel of lemonade for refreshment. Tabitha wore her best dress, a blue calico with white trim that she'd thankfully packed for her new life. Mrs. Palmer had helped her arrange her hair in a becoming style, pinned up with her mother's silver combs. She felt almost pretty as she entered the church on Vaughn's arm, despite the curious glances directed their way. "Everyone's staring," she whispered to Vaughn. "Because you're the most beautiful woman here," he replied without hesitation. Tabitha blushed. "I think it's more likely because I'm new and arrived with you." "That too," he admitted with a chuckle. "Small town curiosity. Don't worry, they're just trying to figure out if there's a story worth gossiping about." "And is there?" she asked, surprised by her own boldness. Vaughn's blue eyes held hers for a moment. "I hope there might be in time." Before she could respond, Mrs. Fletcher approached, introducing Tabitha to her husband and then to a succession of parents whose children would be in her classroom. Vaughn stayed nearby, occasionally offering a comment or introducing someone he knew. His steady presence was reassuring as Tabitha navigated the sea of new faces and names. When the music shifted to a waltz, Vaughn appeared at her side. "May I have this dance, Miss Anderson?" "You may, Mr. Irwin," she replied with a small curtsy. His hand at her waist was respectful but warm as he guided her onto the floor. For a cowboy, he danced remarkably well, leading her through the steps with confidence. "Where did you learn to waltz?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Virginia society before the war," he said. "My family had expectations for me that didn't include becoming a cowboy." "What happened?" A shadow crossed his face. "The war happened, changed everything, lost my father and brother at Gettysburg. Afterward, the plantation was in ruins." "Nothing to go back to." "I'm sorry," Tabitha said softly. "I didn't mean to bring up painful memories." He shook his head. "It was a long time ago, made my peace with it." His expression lightened. "Besides, if things had gone differently, I'd be stuck in some law office in Richmond instead of dancing with a beautiful schoolteacher in Montana Territory." His compliment warmed her, but before she could respond, the music ended. Vaughn released her, his hand lingering briefly on hers. The evening continued pleasantly, with Tabitha dancing with several other men including Mayor Fletcher and Mr. Wilson from the general store, but she found her gaze repeatedly drawn to Vaughn. He danced with a few other women, including a pretty blonde who seemed particularly eager for his attention, but he always returned to check on Tabitha between dances. "That's Charlotte Weber," Mrs. Palmer informed Tabitha when she caught her watching. "Her father owns the bank. She's had her cap set for Vaughn Irwin for 2 years now, but he's never shown any interest." "I'm not." Tabitha began to protest, but Mrs. Palmer just patted her hand. "Of course not, dear, just making conversation." As the evening wound down, Vaughn escorted Tabitha back to the boarding house. The night was clear, with a canopy of stars unlike anything she'd seen in Boston. "I've never seen so many stars," she said, gazing upward as they walked. "One of the best things about the West," Vaughn agreed. "Makes a man feel small, but in a good way." When they reached Mrs. Palmer's front door, Tabitha turned to him. "Thank you for tonight. I don't think I would have had the courage to go alone." "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for," Vaughn said. "Coming all this way on your own, starting over, takes grit." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but kindness along the way makes all the difference." He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim light from the porch lantern. "Tabitha," he said finally, "I know we've only just met, but I'd like to call on you properly, if that would be welcome." The question caught her off guard, though perhaps it shouldn't have. There had been something building between them since that first moment at the depot. Still, Theodore's betrayal was fresh and she hesitated. "I've recently had my trust broken," she said carefully. "I'm not sure I'm ready to." "I understand," Vaughn said quickly. "No pressure, just wanted you to know my intentions are honorable." His straightforwardness was refreshing after Theodore's pretty words and empty promises. "Thank you for understanding," she said. "Perhaps we could begin as friends." "I'd like that," he said, his smile returning. "Friends it is, then." He tipped his hat and bid her good night, leaving Tabitha to wonder if she'd made the right decision or if caution was causing her to miss something potentially wonderful. Monday morning arrived quickly, and with it, Tabitha's first day as Silver Creek schoolteacher. She arrived early, wanting to organize her materials and prepare the classroom. To her surprise, she found Vaughn already there, building a fire in the wood stove against the morning chill. "Thought you might want the place warmed up," he explained. "Spring mornings can still be pretty cold." "That's very thoughtful," she said, genuinely touched by his consideration. He helped her rearrange the desks and set up the blackboard, then departed with a tip of his hat when the first students began to arrive. Tabitha was grateful for his help, but also relieved to have some space. His presence was increasingly distracting in ways that both thrilled and alarmed her. The school day went reasonably well for a first attempt. The children were curious about their new teacher, but generally well behaved. The age range presented challenges, but Tabitha had experience with divided attention from her previous position. By the end of the day, she felt cautiously optimistic about her ability to manage the classroom. As she was gathering her things to leave, there was a knock at the schoolhouse door. She opened it to find Vaughn standing there, hat in hand. "Thought you might like an escort back to town," he said. "Heard the Miller boys can be a handful sometimes." Tabitha smiled. "They were actually quite well behaved today, but I appreciate the offer." They walked back toward town together, Tabitha sharing stories from her first day while Vaughn listened attentively, occasionally offering insights about particular families or students. "You seem to know everyone in town," she observed. "Part of the job," he explained. "Ranching business touches most families around here one way or another. Either they work for one of the spreads, or they provide services to the ranchers, or they're competing for the same land and water. Are there many conflicts?" Tabitha asked, thinking of the penny dreadfuls she'd secretly read as a girl, with their dramatic tales of range wars and cattle rustlers. Vaughn shrugged. "Some. Territories settling down compared to how it was when I first arrived. Laws stronger now. Still have issues with rustlers sometimes, and there's always tension with the newer homesteaders." Their conversation continued easily until they reached Mrs. Palmer's. Vaughn declined the invitation to stay for supper, explaining he needed to get back to the ranch. "Will I see you again soon?" Tabitha asked, surprising herself with her directness. "Count on it," he replied with a smile that made her heart skip. "Diamond Creek hands come into town most Saturdays, and I might find reasons to visit before then." Over the following weeks, Vaughn did indeed find reasons to be in town frequently. Sometimes he would appear at the schoolhouse at the end of the day, offering to walk Tabitha home. Other times, he would happen to be at the general store when she was shopping for supplies. Each encounter left Tabitha increasingly drawn to the quiet, thoughtful cowboy with the kind blue eyes. Spring advanced into early summer, and with it came end-of-term examinations for Tabitha's students. The school board, including Mrs. Fletcher, attended the recitations and seemed pleased with the progress the children had made. Afterward, Mrs. Fletcher took Tabitha aside. "We've received word that Miss Jenkins, the teacher we had contracted for the fall term, has accepted a position elsewhere," she said. "The board would like to offer you the permanent position if you're interested." Tabitha's heart leapt. She had come to love Silver Creek and its people far more than she had anticipated. "I would be honored," she said without hesitation. "Excellent," Mrs. Fletcher said, looking pleased. "We'll draw up a formal contract, and—" "Miss Anderson, I hope you won't think me presumptuous, but we've all noticed Mr. Irwin's interest in you." Tabitha felt her cheeks grow warm. "We're friends," she said carefully. Mrs. Fletcher smiled knowingly. "Of course. I simply wanted to say that Vaughn Irwin is held in the highest regard in this community. Should your friendship develop into something more, it would be viewed most favorably." With that unexpected endorsement, Mrs. Fletcher departed, leaving Tabitha to contemplate the implications. She had been holding Vaughn at arm's length, still wary after Theodore's betrayal, but her feelings had grown despite her caution. Perhaps it was time to allow herself to explore those feelings. That Saturday, Vaughn invited her to go riding with him. "There's a spot up in the foothills I'd like to show you," he said. "Mrs. Palmer can pack us a picnic lunch." The day was perfect clear skies, a gentle breeze, and wildflowers blooming across the grasslands. Vaughn had brought a gentle mare for Tabitha, and though she wasn't an experienced rider, she found she enjoyed the freedom of traveling on horseback. They rode for about an hour, climbing gradually into the foothills east of town, until Vaughn led them to a small, hidden valley with a clear stream running through it. "This is beautiful," Tabitha exclaimed as they dismounted. The valley was carpeted with wildflowers, and a small copse of aspen trees provided shade near the stream. "Found it my first year here," Vaughn said, unloading the picnic basket from his saddle. "Come here sometimes to think." "And you're sharing it with me?" Tabitha asked, touched by the gesture. He looked at her directly. Wanted to share something special with you, something that matters to me. They spread a blanket beneath the aspens and unpacked Mrs. Palmer's generous lunch: fried chicken, biscuits, apple pie, and a jar of lemonade. As they ate, they talked more openly than they ever had before. Vaughn spoke of his experiences during the war, the loss of his family, and his journey west. Tabitha shared her own losses: her parents, the school in Boston that had felt like home, and finally, hesitantly, the full story of Theodore's deception. He courted me through letters for nearly a year, she explained. He presented himself as a businessman in San Francisco, looking for a wife with refinement and education. I was flattered. When he proposed, I accepted without ever having met him in person. And he abandoned you in Silver Creek? Vaughn asked, his expression darkening. He was supposed to meet the train, Tabitha confirmed, but there was no one waiting. The station master told me my ticket couldn't take me any farther without additional payment, which I didn't have. Later, I learned from a telegram that Theodore had married someone else, a banker's daughter in Sacramento, with a substantial dowry. He's a fool, Vaughn said flatly. A dishonorable fool who didn't deserve you. His indignation on her behalf was warming. It was a painful lesson, she acknowledged. But had things gone as planned, I would never have come to Silver Creek, never met you. Vaughn reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. Tabitha, he said softly, I know you've been cautious and I respect that. But I need you to know that my feelings for you are real. I've never met anyone like you. Tabitha's heart raced. I've been afraid to trust those feelings, she admitted. After Theodore. I'm not Theodore, Vaughn said simply. I don't make promises I don't intend to keep. Looking into his earnest blue eyes, Tabitha made a decision. She leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief but meaningful, a surrender to the feelings she'd been fighting, a step toward trust. When she pulled back, Vaughn's expression was one of wonder and joy. Does this mean you might consider being more than friends? He asked, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I think it does, she replied, her own smile matching his. Their ride back to town was filled with a new awareness of each other. They talked about simpler things: the beauty of the landscape, the progress of Tabitha's students, the upcoming 4th of July celebration in town. But underneath, the conversation ran a current of understanding. Something had changed between them, something important and full of promise. When they reached Mrs. Palmer's, Vaughn helped Tabitha down from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist. May I call on you tomorrow? He asked. Properly this time? I would like that very much, she replied. True to his word, Vaughn arrived the following afternoon dressed in his Sunday best, with a bouquet of wildflowers. Mrs. Palmer practically beamed as she showed him into the parlor where Tabitha waited. That Sunday became the first of many. Throughout June and into July, Vaughn courted Tabitha with a sincerity and steadiness that healed the wounds left by Theodore's betrayal. They attended church together, went on rides in the countryside, and spent evenings on Mrs. Palmer's porch swing, talking until the stars came out. The 4th of July celebration brought the entire community together for a picnic, games, and dancing on the town square. As twilight fell, Vaughn led Tabitha away from the festivities to a quiet spot behind the church. I've been wanting to ask you something, he said, suddenly serious. Been carrying this around for a week, waiting for the right moment. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. Tabitha's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a simple gold ring with a small diamond. Tabitha Anderson, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, I love you. I know it hasn't been long, but I'm certain of my feelings. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Tabitha felt tears welling in her eyes. 6 months ago, she had accepted a proposal from a man she had never met, based on pretty words in letters. Now she stood before a man she had come to know deeply: his strength, his kindness, his integrity. There was no doubt in her mind. Yes, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Yes, Vaughn, I will marry you. His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he gathered her into his arms and kissed her, a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. When they returned to the celebration, hand in hand, Mrs. Palmer was the first to notice the ring. Her squeal of delight drew attention, and soon they were surrounded by well-wishers. Mrs. Fletcher looked particularly pleased, as if their engagement confirmed her good judgment in hiring Tabitha permanently. They set the wedding date for mid-August, before the fall term began. Tabitha wrote to her few remaining relatives in Boston, but knew they wouldn't be able to travel such a distance. It didn't matter. Silver Creek had become her home, its people her family. The wedding was held in the church, decorated with wildflowers and ribbons. Tabitha wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Palmer and the other ladies had helped her make, with lace from Mrs. Fletcher's own wedding gown incorporated into the collar and cuffs. Vaughn looked impossibly handsome in a new black suit, his normally unruly hair tamed for the occasion. The entire town turned out for the celebration, and the reception at the town hall afterward lasted well into the evening. When it was finally time to leave, Vaughn surprised Tabitha by leading her not to Mrs. Palmer's, but to a small house at the edge of town. "Welcome home, Mrs. Irwin," he said, sweeping her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Tabitha gasped as she looked around. The house was modest but well built, with actual wallpaper in the front room and curtains at the windows. There was furniture simple but solid and a kitchen with a proper stove. "When did you do all this?" she asked in wonder. "Been working on it evenings and Sundays," Vaughn explained. "Had help from some of the ranch hands and folks in town, wanted to surprise you." "It's perfect," she said, exploring the small home that was now theirs. There were 2 bedrooms, one furnished with a large bed covered in a quilt she recognized as Mrs. Palmer's handiwork, the other smaller and currently empty. "Room to grow," Vaughn explained with a meaningful look that made Tabitha blush. That night they began their life together as husband and wife. Vaughn was tender and patient, his love for her evident in every touch, every whispered word. Tabitha gave herself to him completely, any remaining barriers between them dissolving in the intimacy they shared. The following weeks were filled with happiness as they settled into married life. Tabitha began the fall term as Silver Creek's permanent teacher, while Vaughn continued his work at Diamond Creek Ranch. Their evenings and weekends were precious time together, building the foundation of their marriage. By October, Tabitha began to suspect a change in her body. Her monthly cycle, usually as regular as clockwork, was late. She felt tired more easily, and certain foods that she normally enjoyed now turned her stomach. She said nothing to Vaughn, wanting to be certain before raising his hopes. When her condition became undeniable, she prepared a special supper and waited for Vaughn to return from the ranch. He arrived as the sun was setting, bringing with him the scent of horses and open air. "Something smells wonderful," he said, hanging his hat by the door and washing up at the basin. "I made your favorite," Tabitha replied, setting a pot roast on the table. "And I have news." Vaughn looked up, curious. "What kind of news?" Tabitha took a deep breath. "I visited Dr. Morgan today. He confirmed what I've suspected for a few weeks now." She placed a hand over her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby, Vaughn, in late spring." For a moment, Vaughn stood perfectly still, processing her words. Then his face transformed with a joy so pure it brought tears to Tabitha's eyes. "A baby." He repeated, crossing the room in 2 strides to take her in his arms. "We're having a baby," she nodded, laughing through her tears as he lifted her and spun her around. "Careful," she protested, though she wasn't truly worried. "The doctor says I'm perfectly healthy, but still." Vaughn set her down immediately, his expression changing to one of concern. "Of course, I'm sorry, I was just so." He placed a gentle hand on her abdomen, awe in his eyes. "Our child," he whispered. That night, as they lay together in their bed, Vaughn held her close, his hand protectively covering her stomach. "I never thought I'd have this," he confessed in the darkness. After the war, I figured I'd live out my days alone, then you stepped off that train looking lost and brave all at once." Tabitha turned in his arms to face him. "I thought my life was over when I realized Theodore had abandoned me. Instead, it was just beginning." "Thank God for dishonest men who don't keep their promises," Vaughn said with a wry smile. "Brought you to me." As her pregnancy progressed, Tabitha continued teaching, though she knew she would need to take a leave of absence when the baby arrived. The town was supportive, with Mrs. Fletcher assuring her that her position would be waiting when she was ready to return. Vaughn became even more attentive, if that were possible. He took on extra work to save money for the baby, while also ensuring that Tabitha didn't overexert herself. The second bedroom was gradually transformed into a nursery, with a cradle handmade by Mr. Wilson, the general store owner who was apparently skilled in woodworking. Winter came and went, the cold Montana months passing slowly. Tabitha's body changed, her belly growing round with new life. Vaughn marveled at every change, his love for her deepening as she carried their child. In late April, just as the first wildflowers were beginning to bloom, Tabitha went into labor. Mrs. Palmer and the doctor were summoned while Vaughn paced anxiously outside the bedroom door. After hours of labor, their daughter was born a healthy girl with a tuft of dark hair like her father's and eyes that would eventually turn as blue as his. "She's perfect," Vaughn whispered when he was finally allowed to enter the room. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, cradling his newborn daughter with hands that trembled slightly. "What should we name her?" "I was thinking of Victoria," Tabitha said, watching the two people she loved most in the world. "It means victory." "Because that's what she is, a victory over all the circumstances that could have kept us apart." "Victoria Irwin," Vaughn tested the name. "It's beautiful, like her mother." The first months of Victoria's life passed in a blur of joy and exhaustion. Tabitha took a leave from teaching until the fall term, dedicating herself to motherhood. Vaughn continued his work at the ranch, but arranged his schedule to be home more often, unwilling to miss any of his daughter's development. By the time Victoria was 6 months old, a routine had been established. Mrs. Palmer often watched the baby when Tabitha returned to teaching, doting on her as if she were her own grandchild. The small house that had seemed so perfect when they first married now rang with the sounds of family Victoria's coos and cries, Tabitha's lullabies, Vaughn's deep laugh as he played with his daughter. On their first wedding anniversary, Vaughn surprised Tabitha with news of his own. "Mr. Garrett's offered me a partnership in Diamond Creek," he told her over a special dinner after Victoria had been put to bed. "Been considering it for a while, but wanted to make sure it was the right move for us." Tabitha's eyes widened. "A partnership, Vaughn, that's wonderful." He nodded, a mix of pride and humility in his expression. "Ranch has done well these past years. Garrett's spending more time back east, wants someone with a real stake in the business to manage things here. Said I've earned it." "You have," Tabitha agreed firmly. "No one works harder or knows the business better." "It would mean changes," Vaughn cautioned. "More responsibility, but also more security for our future, for Victoria, and—" he hesitated, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth, "for any brothers or sisters she might have someday." Tabitha returned his smile, reaching across the table to take his hand. "I think it sounds perfect." The partnership brought new prosperity to their small family. By the time Victoria was walking and talking, they had moved to a larger house with a proper garden for Tabitha and enough rooms for the family they both hoped would continue to grow. And grow it did. When Victoria was 2, Tabitha gave birth to their son, James, named after Vaughn's father. 2 years later, another daughter, Elizabeth, joined the family. Each child was a blessing, each one strengthening the bond between Tabitha and Vaughn. As the years passed, Silver Creek grew from a small frontier town into a thriving community. The railroad expanded, bringing more settlers and businesses. Tabitha continued teaching until their fourth child was born, at which point she reluctantly resigned her position to focus on her growing family. But her influence on the town's education continued, as she served on the school board and helped establish Silver Creek's first library. Diamond Creek Ranch prospered under Vaughn's management, eventually becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. When Mr. Garrett passed away, having no heirs of his own, he left his majority share of the ranch to Vaughn, making him the sole owner. It was a responsibility Vaughn took seriously, teaching his sons the business as they grew old enough to learn. On warm summer evenings, Tabitha would often sit on the porch of their home, watching Vaughn play with their children in the yard. In those moments, she would remember the frightened, heartbroken young woman who had stepped off the train in Silver Creek all those years ago, certain her life was ruined. How wrong she had been. Theodore's betrayal, which had once seemed like the end of everything, had led her to Vaughn, to love, to family, to a life richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined in Boston. Sometimes, fate's cruelest moments were merely setting the stage for its greatest gifts. When Victoria turned 18, she announced her intention to attend college back east, something that would have been unthinkable for a rancher's daughter when Tabitha first arrived in Silver Creek. Vaughn was resistant at first, protective of his firstborn, but Tabitha reminded him of their own journeys. "We both had to travel far from home to find each other," she said gently. "Victoria deserves the chance to find her own path." On the day they put Victoria on the eastbound train, Tabitha stood with Vaughn's arm around her waist, their other children clustered around them. As the train pulled away, carrying their daughter toward her future, Tabitha looked up at her husband. His hair was streaked with silver now, lines of experience etched around his eyes, but he was still her handsome cowboy. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Taking the hand of that lost woman at the depot all those years ago." Vaughn's blue eyes, undimmed by time, met hers with the same warmth they had always held. "Not for a single moment," he said, drawing her closer. "Best decision I ever made." As they turned to walk back to their waiting wagon, their 3 younger children running ahead, Tabitha reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a lonely teacher in Boston to a beloved wife and mother in Montana, her life had unfolded in ways she could never have predicted or planned. And it had all begun with a moment of kindness, a cowboy taking her hand when she needed it most, leading her not just to shelter, but to love, to family, to home. In the years that followed, their family continued to grow with the addition of grandchildren. Each new life was a testament to the love that had begun that day at Silver Creek Depot. Vaughn and Tabitha grew old together, watching their children establish their own lives and families, some staying close to the ranch while others ventured farther afield. Diamond Creek Ranch became a legacy, passed down to James, who had his father's skill with cattle and horses. Their daughters pursued education and independence in ways that would have been unusual for women of Tabitha's generation, making both parents proud. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the entire extended family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. As Tabitha looked around at the faces of her children, grandchildren, and the friends who had become family over the decades, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. That evening, as the younger generations continued the celebration, Vaughn took her hand and led her away from the noise, to the quiet spot beneath the stars where he had proposed all those years ago. "Did you ever imagine this?" he asked, his voice weathered by time but still strong. "That day when I found you at the depot," Tabitha shook her head. "Never. I thought my life was ending that day. Instead, it was just beginning." Vaughn pulled her close, his embrace as secure as it had always been. "Best thing that ever happened to me was you getting stranded in Silver Creek." "And the best thing that ever happened to me," Tabitha replied, "was a kind cowboy who took my hand when I needed it most." Under the vast Montana sky, surrounded by the life and love they had built together, they shared a kiss as sweet and promising as their first. Their story, which had begun with abandonment and uncertainty, had become one of enduring love of family, of a life well lived together. And in Silver Creek, where the old-timers still gathered to share stories, they would sometimes speak of the schoolteacher who arrived with nothing but a carpet bag and broken dreams, and the cowboy who saw her worth from the very beginning. Their love story became part of the town's history, a reminder that sometimes life's greatest disappointments lead to its greatest joys if you have the courage to take an outstretched hand and begin again.